Thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transportation. You might be able to see from my background that I am at the Marin office, not at home. And that's going to still be the case for another, I guess, just under 2 weeks. Anyway, as I promised, I want to talk about the Northeast Corridor meltdowns that have been happening the last couple days, maybe last week. It's kind of weird because when I took the train from Boston to New York on Tuesday, which is why I did it stream Tuesday, the train was fine. It actually got to Penn Station early. At no point did it fall far behind schedule, and it actually got to Penn Station, I think, 9 minutes early. And then, but apparently there have been little delays, cancellations all over the week, and then 2 days ago it got especially bad. I was supposed to be on a train to day trip to Philadelphia and meet up with people from the Fifth Square community. I want to say that Fifth Square is the Effective Transit Alliance of Philadelphia, but it is incorrect to say that. The Effective Transit Alliance is the Fifth Square of New York. So the Effective Transit Alliance, ETA, we're basing ourselves on mainly on two advocacy groups, which are Transit Matters in Boston and Fifth Square in Philadelphia. So very technically oriented, very forward thinking about what to push for. So for example, for Fifth Square, something very important to them is they're pushing the Roosevelt Boulevard subway idea, and how it can be done rather inexpensively and provide public transport, like rapid public transit service to a rather underserved area. And I was supposed to day trip to Philly to meet up with them on Thursday, and my train was canceled. And I don't mean the train was canceled to get the next one. All the trains were delayed / canceled. There were hours of delays, and after I think 2 hours, we were told that, I gave up, and around then the train was just formally cancelled. To give Amtrak credit where due, as I said, it was a day trip. The trip back, I don't know if it was cancelled. I think it was just delayed, but not enough for full compensation. But they did say that they would give me the money back, because I guess I was getting to Philadelphia via an Amtrak train that was cancelled. And so the meltdown affected the entire system on the Northeast Corridor. Trains were being suspended for hours between New Haven and Philadelphia. This was not supposed to affect the other Amtrak line entering New York, which was the Empire Corridor, so to Albany and upstate New York. But there were some delays on that. And yesterday, Sid actually got caught by them. So Sid is currently at Narrowscope, the Interactive Fiction Convention. Not Horoscope, Narrowscope. As you can see, it is in Rochester. She elected to take a train there. The train was delayed and then cancelled. She had to take a bus instead. And so this is on a completely separate line. Now, the problem was not exactly at Penn Station. The problem with the Northeast Corridor on Thursday was, as I understand it, two separate things happened. There was a fire that I think would be affected the tracks, and then the fire got into a transformer. So the transformer was destroyed, and they needed to fight the fire and then boot it back up. This was blamed on the heat. Quite a lot of things for summertime delays are blamed on the heat. Now, I don't think that it is correct to blame them on the heat. This is not unusual heat right now. So the temperature in New York is about 32, 33 degrees. The problem is if I put in New York weather right now, it's not going to tell me the weather yesterday, it's going to tell me the weather today, and today it's 32. Um, I don't know what the easiest way is of finding past weather. Again, usually if you want the weather, you want the forecast. This was the temperature over the last week. So this was what it was like to be in Boston. And Boston's the same heat wave. In Boston and New York, going back to Monday or Tuesday, I believe, and maybe even Sunday. But anyway, I bring this up because the temperature was 31, 32, 33. And I would like to point something out to, not City Council, New York City. Do they have climate data here? Yeah, but not in, okay, this is, okay, so this is the average between 1991 and 2020. The mean daily maximum, now this is June, but in July is 29.4 and in August 28.5. The mean absolute maximum in June is 33, so the temperatures of the past week have been near but not at the maximum, not the maximum, the mean annual maximum for June over 1991 to 2020, well below the mean maximum over this 30-year period for July, and a little bit below the mean. Again, maybe not a little bit, also well below. Again, we're talking 32, and the mean maximum is 34. Again, the mean daily maximum is 29, so it is 3 degrees hotter than the average July day. So, okay, Newark at 38, but, okay. I will point out also other things are being blamed on the heat in New York. I've heard an internet outage at my hotel blamed on heat, like a long internet outage blamed on the heat. So, Newark weather. Okay, so Newark was 36, and it's going to go back to 31. Okay, just to put things in perspective, the 32 we're talking about in New York, again, it's 3 degrees more than the July maximum, and just to put things in perspective, the January maximum is +4, which means that this is, the weather we're talking about is something that should be planned for at, assuming it's symmetric, which it isn't quite, but assuming it's symmetric, at about the same rate as freezing daytime weather. Right, because to have snow that doesn't melt during the daytime, you need to be about 0. So that's 4 below January maximum, which is why there isn't persistent snow coverage in New York City or Berlin, which is the same summer, which is the same winter temperature. Much cooler summers, but the same winter temperature. So there's always some kind of accumulation that lasts, even in very warm winters. At least at one point is there snow accumulation, but usually there's snowfall and then it melts the next day. So snow accumulation, again, it requires below freezing daytime temperatures, and that is something that occurs every winter in New York City, usually many times per winter. Not many as in 20, but maybe 3, 4. There will be cold spells of several days in a row where this happens, and this is something that is well known within New York. New York does not shut down when that happens, and because temperatures that are 4 or 5 degrees away from the norm are themselves normal. No, there are cities that shut down whenever there's snow. Paris is such a city. Paris does not consistently have snow accumulation. Vancouver, same thing. Vancouver, I think, generally does have at least one snow accumulation every winter, and several days where there's snow. Even if it doesn't accumulate, Vancouver is very wet in the winter, and it's near freezing. And in Vancouver, when there's snow, the city will just shut down. They're not used to it. And people from elsewhere mock them for this because in, for example, Montreal, um, it's much more normalized. But Montreal is also much colder in winter than Vancouver. New York is in between, but New York does not shut down that way in winter. Um, 4 or even 5 degrees from the July mean daily maximum should not lead to a meltdown. So this does not involve any kind of climate change, any kind of adaptation to a warmer world, which is, yeah, warmer, but we're talking 1.5 degrees right now. We're talking long term, like, by 2100 warming of, I think, 2.5, 2.7, and that is something that is considered apocalyptic almost. Maybe not quite apocalyptic, like 4 is like apocalyptic. 2.7 is a big refugee crisis because it does mean that, some places where there's ice caps because the mean summer temperature is -1, it's going to flip to +1, and then it's going to melt. So there's going to be maybe a sea level rise of tens of centimeters, which is in certain parts of the world just going to drown the various floodplains. But first of all, that's not happened. We're talking by 2100 under current policy. And second, this is an average trailing 30 years. So this is places that, so this is like maybe not like 19th century little ice age temperatures, but this is something that New York and the region need to be prepared for. Again, it's not even climate change. This is like, people talk about climate change as something in the future until maybe last decade. So yeah, people would point out that 1998 was an atypically warm year, or 2005, but that was still considered climate change as something in the future, and these are the years that this would be based on. So so again, temperatures up to about the mid 30s should not destroy the infrastructure, and if they do, it is not because of the heat. If they do, it is because the infrastructure is not in a good enough state for this. Now, there is a certain investment that should make this better. It is not going to be the only issue. It would not protect transformers from burning. With fires affecting transformers, I imagine it's something involving pruning vegetation properly. One of the ways that you maintain your infrastructure is by pruning vegetation. This is something that is common for track maintenance as well, and one way you can figure out that a piece of track is really not being maintained properly is if the train brushes up against branches of trees. It happened to me once in France. I think it was on the TGV between Nice and Marseille. And the Riviera line is not an LGV, it is a classical line. And maybe the middle parts of it, the ones that are not used by commuter trains in either the Nice region or the Marseille/Toulon region, are just not very well maintained. Leaves on the track is another example of this. So leaves on the track is not something that I invented. Okay, they're leaves on the track. Leaves on the line. Slippery rail is called leaves on the line in the United Kingdom. And this, again, this is not supposed to happen. If you have trees that shed leaves, they don't go this close to the tracks. You prune them. Just normal track maintenance. Again, if it's not trees that are gonna do this, then it doesn't matter. But in the same way that you don't need to prune vegetation to prevent fires in environments where they're not gonna catch fire. Fire ecology is not always like. So I don't know if it was a wildfire. The rumors that I heard where there was not. There was some rando threw a cigarette butt, and that turned into a fire. But the but that's again, it's something that's just gonna happen. If anything, uh, that particular cause should become less frequent in the future because smoking prevalence is decreasing. It's also much lower in the United States than in most other rich countries. So the fact that cigarette butts don't randomly cause fires didn't randomly cause fires or don't elsewhere. That is not Americans being unique or poor behavior, because again, this is kind of behavior that first the United States is better at, and again getting better. Uh, and Yeah, so you do want to have better track maintenance, you better no not track, better maintenance of way, which includes the area around the tracks. Also, again, the areas around the transformers, because unless this is the sort of fire that leads to mass evacuations, this should not lead to damage to the transformer. Uh, the transformer does not need to be in a beautiful environment. So sometimes you do not want to prune the trees because it is kind of pretty to look at the tree. So in residential areas, trees greatly increase the value of the property. And I mean, maybe I'm saying it in a kind of real estate sense, but there's a reason, and the reason is people like looking at trees. A view from If you have a view from your home that lets you look at trees, generally you will prefer that view. Uh, there, if you have there's something called the Manhattan view, which was where I was living at Columbia dorms many years ago, which was uh, my window was facing an interior courtyard and not the street. And unlike in European courtyards, New York new tenements have courtyards that are just not as interesting to look at, and that one was the view was if I tilted my head sufficiently, I could see branches of one tree. And again, that's something that people mock New York for. Usually, people from within New York. Uh, and the one year that I was facing a park, I was facing I was living across from St. Nicholas Park for a year. That was a pretty nice view. Tiny apartment. Nice view. Uh, so something from which passengers can see trees, or people or residents in general can see trees, that's valuable. So you do not want to have a completely treeless uh, environment near the tracks as far as possible. Again, based on not having them shed leaves seasonally and electrically insulate the tracks. But certainly if it's near a transformer that is an industrial site, that is, it's not just a work site, it's a work site that's usually not very labor intensive, so it's not like saying, oh, well, the workers deserve a nice view. Um, there aren't that many workers at a transformer. This is, like, it's not, as I said, it's not labor intensive. That's something that from the perspective of industrial safety, I think, you can actually fix that. And again, and then there are track fires. The question is then, why is there combustible stuff on the right of way? I don't think they have wooden sleepers on the Northeast Corridor in New Jersey. They do in Connecticut. That is not the right material to build sleepers out of. You want concrete. Usually, not for fire safety. It's usually just because it's lower maintenance. Uh, so you want to do a lot of track renewal, and the Northeast Corridor specifically has track renewal problems. Not exactly in the sense of not prioritizing it, because they absolutely do. They spend a lot of money on maintenance and on renewal. I don't know the spending in Jersey. I know in Connecticut what it is, and the renewal spending in Connecticut annually is about the same as the one-time, like once in generation spending that we see in Germany. So this is tracks that get a lot of maintenance at extremely low productivity. Usually, and I think it's actually related to the poor state of the tracks, because one of the ways that you do better maintenance in a rich country in the 21st century or the late 20th is you want to have consistent history. So what I mean by consistent history, you do not want each sleeper to come from a different year or a different decade, which means you don't do maintenance one sleeper at a time. Part of it is that it's too labor intensive to do it one sleeper at a time, and track renewal machines will do the entire section. But also, you want to have controllable history. You want to be able to say that all of the sleepers on a long track section, ideally on all tracks of the same multi-track line, came from the same batch, the same year, maybe even the same manufacturer. If there's a defect, if there's a defect, sorry, then you know what happened. Either it's a normal failure rate, or it's just a defective bunch. You don't replace things one at a time, you replace them many at a time. It's actually, there's actually something analogous to that in the tech industry, where they use very low-grade hardware for their servers. They're just backed up and distributed in such a way that even with a much higher failure rate than is acceptable for a home computer or a normal corporate server, they have equivalent levels of reliability, and they also never replace them one at a time. They replace them in large batches, and I think there's even an XKCD comic about that. XKCD scale redundancy. Yeah, this one. Okay, maybe I should not to explain XKCD. Yeah, so this is what they do. The rest is like people going. This is people just doing competitive. What's it called? Competitive one-upping. But the early bits actually are the norm. And so the correct way to do maintenance is you don't want to have workers walk along the tracks and replace one thing at a time based on what looks defective. You want regular intervals. These regular intervals involve replacing the entire section, again with machines, because labor is expensive in 21st century America or France or Germany. And this also means that the line has consistent, again, the systems, the segments of the systems have well-known provenance. You can say, oh right, this section received full track renewal in 2017. This section received last track renewal in 1994, and because of that, it is scheduled for another batch of renewal in, let's say, 2028. That is the correct way to do maintenance. If you're trying to, spend, let's say, $800 million-ish on maybe 400, 500 kilometers of double track line every 30 years, not every 1 year. If that's what you're trying to do, then this also means that you know which systems are at risk, because it's never one individual component, it's always an entire system, with a much clearer chain of responsibility. There is an engineer who signed off on saying that the entire thing was safe, not one sleeper at a time, not one utility pole at a time, not one, in this case, catenary pole at a time. Engineers take this very seriously. There is this culture that an engineer will not sign off on saying something is safe unless they think that it's safe. They are going to be held liable if it turns out to be wrong. I mean, I mean, if they say safe to within a certain tolerance and that tolerance is reached, yeah, I mean, it's within the tolerance. But if they did, but if a professional engineer would not have believed that it is safe and they sign it anyway, then they might even be criminally liable. Um, so again, much clearer chain of responsibility, less labor intensivity, because it can just run a tracker and roll machine. Um, Now, there's also the issue of constant tension catenary. That's the thing that would not have fixed the problem with the transformer being on fire, but would fix many other problems. So, the traditional form of building catenary in the United States is something called variable tension. Uh, and there's a more precise version, which is how catenary is basically always built these days, even at lower speeds, which is constant tension. Variable tension is more traditional. Engineers are more used to it. Railroaders are more used to it. It has two big problems that are relevant to the Northeast Corridor. The first is it sags in the heat, variable tension catenary that is, which means that above a certain temperature, it will just not work. And even as you get close to that temperature, the failure rate will rise. You will have lines snap. The train may be delayed even when it was known a day in advance that this was a problem. Happened to me once. I think it was in 2011 when my mother was visiting and we were going New York to Providence. When I, and back, and so that happened in Connecticut. Now Connecticut is not variable tension. Connecticut is constant tension, but even then they sometimes have problems with lines snapping in the heat. Much worse with variable tension. So the first problem again is its reliability, especially in the heat. The second problem is variable tension catenary limits your speed. On the Northeast Corridor, the limit is 135 miles an hour. As a result, that speed is not exceeded south of New York, with the exception of a short section, New Brunswick to Marsville, I believe, where I don't know if if they're about to finish installing constant tension cat, or if they have just debuted. That was expressly for the purpose of increasing the top speed from 135 to 160 miles an hour on the Acela. Now, the actual speed impact of that increase is basically nothing, because it is not a long enough section for the difference between 135 and 160 to matter that much. Especially because the Acela is not a fast accelerating train. So I think that total impact was somewhat more than a minute. I think it's 100 seconds if you exclude acceleration and deceleration, so maybe it's more like 90, so maybe a minute and a half. They spent several hundred millions of dollars on this, which is just an insane construction cost for, I think, 40 kilometers of quad-track catenary replacement. They didn't even need to replace the transformers, because the transformers don't care whether the cat is constant or variable tension. Again, the catenary tension is not gonna save a burning. It's not gonna save a transformer for burning. Other kinds of maintenance will, but it will greatly reduce heat sagging, and if you use better materials, then it will just eliminate the heat sagging. The northeastern United States does not have atypically large temperature ranges. Like, it does have a larger temperature range than Germany, for example. It does not have that much of a temperature range, and its diurnal is not at all a big thing. And in Korea, for example, the temperature range is, I think, larger than in the northeastern United States. In Japan, I think it's pretty comparable. I think it's shifted to the warmer direction both ways. Maybe it's a little narrower than in New York, but only a little. So New York, it's just the daily means. It's 1 versus 25, so 24. And then Tokyo would be what, probably about 20, I'm guessing. So geography. So same normals. So 5 versus 26. Okay, so this is 21 and a half versus a bit more than 24. Yeah, that's not why there are bad sagging issues in the Northeast. In Seoul, again, as I said, it's wider. It's harsher winters, slightly warmer summers. 28 at this point. And so this is really, again, it's a matter of how seriously you take maintenance, which does not mean prioritizing things like state of good repair, because evidently the Amtrak was asking for state of good repair money in the Obama stimulus rather than for high-speed rail money. But the but you certainly don't want to be too reactive. You don't want to be, oh, there was a fire, so let's figure out. You want to be much more proactive, and again, it means things like much more active pruning of fixed structures. It means constant tension cat on the entire Northeast corridor. Right now they have it north of New York. I believe the Catenary New York to New Haven is already constant tension, even though it's a slow section. New Haven to Boston was only electrified in the 1990s for the Acela, and that's constant tension. And you just eliminate variable tension catenary from your vocabulary. Just do, like, even the branches, you probably want them to do constant tension just for their reliability. In the United States, unlike in Europe, people do go to work in the summer on hot days. So you definitely want to be in a situation where even in July, the trains are reliable, even on commuter lines. These are branches, again, not just the Northeast Corridor, but the branches. But these are pretty busy branches. I don't actually know. So I don't actually know if the Marston, if like the more recent 25 kV 60 hertz installations on the Marston Essex lines and on the outer portions of the North Jersey coastlines, the middle portion, or just electrified, are also constant tension. I believe that the older bits of the North Jersey coast catenary are also variable tension, but don't quote me on that. SEPTA is, I believe, entirely variable tension. So yeah, please don't do that. Even on slow lines, variable tension, the maybe 135 miles an hour speed limit doesn't matter on a slow line or a medium speed line, but it does matter that the speed limits are much worse once the temperature goes above about 32, 33-ish. Which again, these are temperatures that, it's not even a climate change issue. These are temperatures that occur multiple times a year, regularly, every summer in New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Again, about as common as daytime freezes in New York City. Daytime freezes in New York City are well understood to be a thing. Again, it means snow accumulation for more than the night. And that is something that always occurs in New York every winter. It is well known. And the city is prepared for that. Sometimes they do little service cuts on the subway. Maybe they, if they know they're going to get a lot of freezing rain or something, then they might need to store trains underground. That sometimes happens. But they're not going to do general service disruption. And they will get, for example, snow plows for the streets, for the trains as well, in order to be able to maintain regular services as close as possible when the temperature for like 2-3 days in a row never goes above -2, which again happens every winter. Again, mid-30s temperatures do occur, not every day in July. The average again is 29.5, but several times per summer. It's normal. It's not even a climate change thing. sometimes there are certain preparations. For example, in London, they just gave up on air conditioning, by which I mean they've tried a lot of air conditioning, but they cannot properly air condition most of the underground because the tube lines uh, have tiny tunnels and tiny trains. There's no room for installing air conditioning. There's no room for the waste heat to go away. I mean, air conditioning does not destroy heat, right? I mean, it doesn't convert energy into matter. It just moves the heat somewhere else. That is, say, outside. Um, and the tunnels are very narrow again. Because the electrical energy that powers the trains obviously is not converted into, it's not they're converting energy to matter again. The waste heat also has to go somewhere in the tunnels. So the temperature inside the tube tunnels is very high, not even just in the summer. It is deep enough underground that there should not be big diurnal or seasonal changes. In general, the reason why the sea moderates the temperature is that there's convection in the water, so the seasonal differences extend a fair amount of depth, whereas Earth is a much better insulator. So the differences in temperature on land occur almost entirely in the top meter of the soil, to the point that when the tube lines were built in the most in the early 20th century, the temperature that deep underground was just the London average, and was considered to be a respite from the summer heat. But over time, the waste heat ended up heating up the tunnels to the point that they're much warmer than even a bad London summer. And the again, they're away. So they tried doing air conditioning, and then I think it's only viable on the Victoria line, which is more modern. So not, maybe more modern is harder to explain. It's just more recent. It was built in the '60s, not in the 1900s. It's the average, right? It's supposed to be the same as the average annual temperature. It's just that the tunnels are incredibly warm right now, and the result is that I think the DFL just tells people to bring a bottle of water. This was really bad when I don't actually remember if I had to deal with this when I was going with to Adventure X the last 2 years, but when I was in London in 2018, in July, there was the temperature there was just really bad. Ugh. Yeah, fair. Yeah, and so they say again. I mean, again, they're trying. I think they're trying to drill some holes, some vertical holes, just to let the waste heat escape to the surface. And again, on the Vic, they have air conditioning. On the subsurface lines, they have air conditioning. I have no idea. I would say that if they are, then it is a pretty significant technological innovation to be able to do so on tiny tunnels. And again, they tell people to bring a bottle of water. I mean, sometimes geography is the problem, or sometimes it's geography plus decisions that were made in 1906. I mean, it's before 1906. 1906 was when it opened. 1906, 1907 was when it opened. It was built years before that, and so but again, it's an adaptation. I think not to the climate of the mid 21st century, but to the climate of the late 20th, early 21st. In the sense of knowing that 35 degrees will occur a couple times every summer in New York, Philly, DC. Please learn how to handle that. That's not even again. It's not climate adaptation. It's like calling Dutch dikes climate adaptation. No, they're not. They're adaptation to flood risk from before climate change. And the now I know there's a lot of mutual blaming. Um, oh, nice. Yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, so if they're capable of doing them, that is really great. Um, I will say New York has had regenerative braking for a while. I don't remember if it started with R142 or so that's 1990s, or R160, which is mid 2000s. It was entering service uh, as I was moving to New York, 2007 maybe. I moved 06. Um, they also have air conditioning on the newer trains in New York. They're also, I think, supposed to have some on the older trains, but it keeps not working. But again, New York built subsurface tunnels. There's much more just space to mount the AC on the train and to expel the waste heat. This is something where London is in a genuinely much more difficult situation than New York is. I imagine that they built the Jubilee Line tunnels to be bigger, like the Vic tunnels, so they will have at least place for the waste heat to circulate. I don't know. I don't. Obviously, I've never lived in London, and I visit, but I don't visit nearly as regularly as I visit New York, so I can't tell you random things about individuals. I'm actually curious, Marta. Oh, yeah, okay, good. I'm actually curious whether, for example, in your experience, the Jubilee is less hot than the other lines, or if they can't because of some reasons it makes it impossible for them to air condition the trains. Um, I guess that the Jubilee uses a lot of old infrastructure, but I can't tell. Is there any old infrastructure on the Jubilee that's an old tube tunnel as opposed to surface connection? Oh yeah, yeah, fair. Or just surface branches that were taken from the Bakerloo / Matt. Because the main tunnel is from the 70s and then the extension is from the 90s. Um, so yeah, this is so. I don't know. I dislike it when people frame this as adaptation to climate change. First of all, adaptation to climate change, as Desmond Tutu reminds us, is climate apartheid. Second, um, this is about temperatures that already occur, as I said. Often it's just, I don't know, a preference for reliability to other people, which is, again, it's less a London thing. Oh, okay, okay. Um, yeah, it's less a London thing and more an American thing where there's just, I don't know, like a sense in which reliability is unimportant. Um, I don't want to do too much cultural like tourism bullshit where in the same way that Americans go to Europe and see everyone else on vacation and say nobody works here, and of course I'm not seeing that in the equivalent at all. I mean downtown Brooklyn, um, but it is kind of weird that I mean I'm constantly seeing just casual unreliability. A lot of casual lateness in the sense that in Germany I'm usually the least punctual member of of a group, and in the United States I'm not gonna say I'm the most punctual. It depends. There was the ETA gathering yesterday where I showed up 17 minutes late because mostly of train delays. The train was sitting at the station instead of going. Ooh, they're finally doing the expansion. Okay. Certainly, like I don't think the United States has atypically bad cost overruns. In fact, in the original papers by Flivbert, the United States did not have worse cost overruns than Europe. The absolute costs are much higher, and yeah, part of it is saying, oh, there will be cost overruns, so let's slap a a contingency factor on the budget, and then that's always spent, and then sometimes more is spent. Yeah, so Germany is a fairly punctual society. I don't think as much as Japan. Certainly, the trains in Germany are constantly delayed. The United States has worse delays in Germany, and just being 15 minutes late, 20 minutes late to things is much more normalized in the United States and in Germany. Uh, okay, the fact that these numbers don't. I mean, I guess these are not lines that really meet. They really run together for long periods, again, except I guess Ventura County. Wait. This is Antelope Valley, and I imagine you mean Antelope Valley / Ventura County, right? And then Orange County is something different. In fact, in the opposite direction. Oh, Paris Valley, sorry. Um, Gays arrive late in every country. In Berlin, queer gatherings start on time. Um, like, I don't get the perception that gays arrive late in Berlin. I mean, gays is kind of weird because these are very rarely gay men. These are usually a bunch of bisexuals, very female shifted group, like so much more lesbians and bi women than gay men or bi men. Uh, yeah. Um, TBH. Diesels can absolutely do 9 trains per hour. In Tel Aviv, they do 14. And no, you want electrification because the return on investment on electrification. I don't actually know how big the trains are on Metrolink. I never remember. But for trains that are, let's say, 8 cars long, like a northeastern, let's call it a northeastern commuter train, you want probably. I think the break-even point on electrification for 8-car trains is on the order of 1/2 to 1 train per hour. Okay, so if it's 5 or 6 cars, then yeah, 1 TPH is when your ROI on electrification becomes unambiguously positive. Just on operating costs, operating and maintenance costs, even if you don't care about air quality. No. The fact that in Germany people say, well, we need to think about batteries, about this line that runs 2-car trains every hour, and then the United States says, oh, yeah, we need to think about, we grudgingly need to electrify because we're planning on running 6-car trains 9 times an hour. That's kind of insane. Yeah, exactly. In Israel, again, in Israel they run them 4.5 minutes apart, and they were surprised that it is possible to even run electric mainline trains more frequently than that. Like it's S-Bahns usually, but the Israel railway network is only about as complex in its branching structure as the, let's say, Munich S-Bahn. Like Israel is small. What's the economic? Why electrify single track line before double tracking it? Oh, okay, good questions. So the north of England is not something that Israelis would be aware of, but Germany is a place that they generally are aware of. Like Israel is learning public transportation from like a medley of Western European places. So probably not Northern England. They don't use British consultancies. They use pan-European ones. But anyway, okay. So about why would you electrify a single track line? A bunch of reasons. First of all, often it's not a long single track line, but it is often a line that is partly double track, partly single track, and so the single track branches connect to a double track trunk. This is the case for a commuter line that I'm sadly familiar with, thankfully not having had to take it very much, which is called the Eastern Line or the Newburyport-Rockport Line in Massachusetts, northeast of Boston. So the main line from Boston up to Salem and Beverly is a mix of single and double track. It's mostly double, but some critical sections are single and are too difficult to double because of, for example, the single tracker is in a tunnel. And then past Beverly to branches to Rockport and Newburyport. And these are largely single track. So why would you electrify not double track? The reason is you're electrifying Boston to Salem, that's the important part, and Beverly. These are two of the busiest suburban stations in the region. And I think Salem, I'm not sure Salem is the number one, but in certain years Salem was number one, in other years it's Mansfield on the Providence line. And but there is still a fair amount of traffic here and here, so you support high frequency Boston to Salem in part through interlining trains that go all the way to Rockport and Newburyport. So if you only electrify half the line, then you're going to run a mix of short turning electrics and diesels going all the way. And yeah, the MBTA is trying to resolve it with battery trains, but battery trains cost a lot of money. Battery trains cost at a premium, less of a premium than, let's say, diesels, and their performance is closer to that of EMUs, but still, I mean, remember, in Germany, they're looking at the ROI, the return on investment on electrifying relative to batteries, not relative to keeping it diesel, and it's still, wiring is a superior option, starting from about the equivalent of 4 cars per hour. These are 8-car trains. 4 cars per hour peak, because the important bit for the decision of battery versus catenary is rolling stock costs, and these are based on the peak, not the base. So you want to electrify. Again, everything needs to be constant tension cat. The only electrification in this area already is because it's 1990s. Just that. And so you want to, so this is why you might want to electrify a single track line. Alternatively, if it's a long intercity line that has longer trains and regular service with regular meet places, then it can work. If your system is almost entirely electrified, let's say the Netherlands and Belgium, you want to complete electrification just not to have to maintain a small fleet of diesels. The LIRR has very high diesel operating costs for that reason, just a small fleet, whereas the electric fleet is very large. Yeah, so this is another good example of where you want to electrify. The fact that Los Angeles is not electrified is just bonkers, because where I live, people talk about electrifying lines to Chemnitz. Chemnitz is not even in a metropolitan area. It's a city of like 250 or 300,000 people, because it's not metropolitan and it's in Saxony. It is kind of a byword for a place that kind of sucks, like post-industrial, post-communist. Quite a lot of people vote for fascists. That kind of place, whereas let's say Leipzig and Dresden, they're both bigger, they're more urban. Yeah, they have a bunch of people who vote fascist, but also a lot of people who are explicitly against it. I would call Leipzig the Antifa capital of Germany as a result. Chemnitz, no. So they're talking about, so I think they're currently electrifying Leipzig to Chemnitz. Like, that's the frontier of electrification in Germany. Germany is not even that electrified by, like, Swedish or Dutch or Indian standards. And then in the United States, people are talking about Boston or completing branches in New York or fucking Los Angeles, or now they're completing in one line in the Bay Area. It's not because they're scared of freights throwing a fit. They had they gave up the right to electrify over freight rail objections for California and speed rails for LA to Selmar. Okay, speaking about their in poverty, so as I said, so circle back to the issue of Amtrak and the maintenance issue. it's not like there's long-term maintenance plan, which is kind of weird because they keep talking about state of good repair, which should be a long-term maintenance plan, but in practice it is not. In practice, state of good repair is an excuse to spend money with nothing to show for it, which is why I keep hammering on why it's not about climate change, because climate adaptation is another great excuse to spend money and not have to promise anything to show for it. If you promise that you're going to spend money and as a result, for let's say Martha's use case, and as a result NHS waits are going to dramatically decrease, that is a promise. Like, Labour basically constantly promises that they will do so, and Blair kind of delivered. People hate Blair mostly over the Iraq War, not just, but mostly over the fucking Iraq War, but he did invest in the NHS, and Keith is likewise promising to invest in the NHS to reduce wait time. So that is an investment where there is something that is going to be, I mean, if it's successful, something that's going to be visibly better. People are going to see that they go to the NHS, and instead of being told to come back next year, they're going to be told to come back next month, next week. If you do, and infrastructure is kind of the equivalent of that, where you can absolutely promise things that are not like the equivalent of building a new hospital. Things that are, we're going to improve reliability, where the trains are going to run on time. Remember, the trains running on time is such a trope about basic government competence that there's a mythology that the fascists in mid-century Italy and Germany were actually capable of that. They absolutely were not. Just as a reminder, the Holocaust trains, the trains to the extermination camps, did not in fact run on time. They had the lowest priority on the German rail network. In at least one case, the Jews were already dead when they got to the extermination camp because the train was delayed by several days, and the people on the train died of exposure to the cold and thirst, I guess. Usually you don't die of hunger in 4 days, but it does weaken you, so you die of exposure. So we will run the trains on time. The state of good repair program will increase reliability is a pledge. Again, it's a pledge that the MTA capital plans of the 1980s and 90s made pretty explicitly, successfully. This is why there's such an obsession with state of good repair in the United States. It's because the MTA promised that and delivered with the capital plans, and then people made more nebulous state of good repair promises that did not go anywhere. But it is important to have regular maintenance of the fixed plant. As I mentioned, prune the fucking trees, prune the brushes. If it's flammable, try not to have it near things that will shut down transportation in the Northeast Corridor if they're on fire. This is a reactive example, but there are many proactive ones. Do constant tension catenary because that's just more reliable and also permits higher speeds. Trains absolutely could go faster than 135 miles an hour, even north of New Brunswick, given other ongoing investments. Yeah, that is part of the Blair. Blair did privatize the state to an extent. It's the entire. I don't know what to call it. I want to call it Thatcherite because Thatcher herself didn't do that very much. Thatcher just underinvested in the civil service, and then it's kind of the maybe more moderate post-Thatcherite mentality of private-public partnershiip. So that's John Major and also Tony Blair, where the idea of things like PPPs, design build, privatization of risk, the idea under Maggie, you don't do PPPs. Under Maggie, the government just doesn't do things. The government just cuts taxes. Taxes on higher income people. She did raise VAT. But the idea of, let's build new hospitals for the NHS and try to do private finance, you're right, I'm thinking of it as partly John Major because of the privatization of the railways, but it's also a Blairite thing. That said, NHS queues did decrease between 97 and 10. And yeah, and so I bring this up because I don't want people to get the impression that they just need to invest in climate adaptation. Again, it's the new state of good repair. It's you invest money without any actionable things that will get better if it is done. The way that, again, Keith is promising lower NHS rates. Is he going to deliver? Maybe. I mean, tepidly optimistic, but and emphasize tepidly, but that again, that's going to be visible in a couple years if it happens. That's not something you say, oh, I'm just going to take credit for things that happened after I got kicked out of office, for things that happened 15 years later, the way you constantly see Thatcherites, like actual Thatcherites, take credit for strong GDP per capita growth under Blair. So not even the person immediately after Maggie, but 2 prime ministers after Maggie. But whereas a promise of adaptation just, I mean, it's carte blanche to spend money without anything to show for it. And there's a mutual blame, which is kind of silly, between Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. My understanding is it was more Amtrak's fault, because the maintenance of way is an Amtrak responsibility, and the fact that a line that has nothing to do with New Jersey Transit, this would say New York to Albany, is also getting hit. That points to Amtrak being at fault. But like, the interrelations between the railroads in the United States and in the Northeast are just incredibly toxic, just inherited from pre-nationalization / state control levels of private competition, where the blame game does matter because you can go to court. In this case, you're not going to court. You're going to like FRA funding for maintenance, and the FRA is not a court. They don't care. But the mentality still persists. And it's kind of weird. Like, I want to say there also has not been enough transparency about what's happened, but I don't think it's even exactly a matter of soft governance like transparency, because in Germany, if I remember correctly, at least in Germany, that I think it's Deutsche Bahn that learned that people are more accepting of delays if you tell them what the cause is, so they just always say what the cause is of a delay. But the delays are still there. So like there is a thing where you do at some point need to actually provide services rather than just explain very apologetically with people who are comms people who are very trained in emotional labor about why you couldn't deliver services. Now, I want to be clear, like, this privatization issue is why Britain can't build infrastructure. That's not why the United States can't maintain it. This is entirely in the public sector. It's just, they don't think about reliability very much. Or if they do, it's always a bunch of band-aids. I've heard the expression held together with duct tape, which is something that I would understand for a lightly used, low-maintenance branch line. The Northeast Corridor is not that at all. The maintenance spending on it is considerable. The renewal spending on it is considerable. It's not even that they're only building flashy things. Most of the money that's being spent is not on anything flashy. So this is something where it's easier for me to show you, unfortunately, New York, like MTA things and Amtrak things. But New York has a very transparent capital plan at this scale, and if you look at this is just me typing things from the 2020 to 2024 capital plan. It splits as so things that are improvements as opposed to renewal. So this is all improvement. This is stuff like 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 or Penn Station Access. The wrap up of East Side Access. So this, you can do control selection on this. This, this, and this. So this is 35% of the plan, of which splits as 10% is just accessibility upgrades at a rate that is mandated by the court. The rest, so this, mostly in this, it's 25%. The rest of the 65% is just renewal and long-term maintenance. Or maybe buying new train sets and buying new buses at the usual schedule. So this is not a system that only does flashy things. This is a system that, if anything, is too comfortable with doing things that are not flashy, because then they don't need to promise anything. Okay. So that's the issue with the maintenance plan. Like they keep talking about the importance of maintaining the system as is, and then you look at the amount of spending. It's just never, again, it's never systematized. It's never going to be saying, okay, in 2025 we're running a track renewal machine on this entire section of the Northeast Corridor, and we will know that the rails and ties are all going to be of that provenance from the same manufacturer. The Catenary is all going to be of that provenance, maybe even already New York to DC, from the same manufacturer. And obviously the contractors are going to be different on different sections, because you do not want to bundle everything into billion-dollar contracts. That is, I mean, we're complaining about the major/Blairite PPP mentality. That is part of the PPP mentality. You do bigger contracts, because smaller contracts mean you negotiate more contracts, which means you need more mid-level civil servants. And the unspoken mentality is that mid-level civil servants are bad. Only political appointees in the United States, or elite Sir Humphrey types, like Oxford, probably PPE grads, matter. So you want big contracts that can be supervised by people in the orbit of the politicians. Consultants will supervise consultants. This is part of this globalized system of construction that has made several countries completely incapable of building infrastructure. Or maybe the United Kingdom, just because London is such a big city that needs so much more infrastructure, can build at the rate of about one line per monarch. Or because it's Victoria, then Jubilee, which both of these lines predate that cost explosion, and then the only new lines is the Elizabeth. So yeah, then they can build like maybe short extensions, and like the Charles line by the time Charles is about to die, and then the William line, and then the George line. So anyway, you do want to break down the civil contracts into smaller pieces, but there needs to be clear provenance, for example, for the systems. Maybe not one vendor for New York to DC, but definitely, with let's say a vendor, maybe skip Trenton to Marshville at this point, but for New York to Trenton, Marshville, New Brunswick to Marshville, New York to New Brunswick, just because it's shorter, just because it's broken, and then, I don't know, Morrisville to Trenton or Morrisville to, not just Philly, that's too short, like all the way to maybe Wilmington, and then Wilmington to D. Like, you want probably low hundreds of million, like 100 million-ish, 200 million, usually per contract, maybe 300, upper level. And then, but again, a lot of standardization. You know where everything came from. You know when everything was installed. You know when it's going to approach end of life and need to be replaced. Until then, maintenance is done with machines. Obviously, manned machines are not entirely autonomous. It's not a lights off factory or anything like that. But things that are highly mechanized and automated. Certainly not railroad workers will walk along the tracks when there's no service and visually inspect whether there are cracks on a sleeper. That's not how things work in a developed country in the 2020s. Maybe in the 1950s, but it is not the 1950s. You can see it in many ways. For example, you can see the lights above me. They are, I think, a modern fluorescent lights, or something that didn't exist then. Also, we're on the internet, and it didn't exist in the 1950s. You can tell in many ways that it's not the 1950s anymore. Uh, so the so anyway, that's what I want to do. You want to be, let's just call it much more modern in how you conceive of maintenance, rather than too reactive. Or like it is kind of insane that a corridor like that is held together with duct tape because it doesn't cost like it's held together with duct tape. That's the thing. Um, it's like the costs. It's like with the construction costs that build excessively sized stations, but they're not a palatial experience for the passengers. Not like these oversized stations are then grand public spaces, or these weird one-off unstandardized non-standard systems look like these really well decorated stations, and like these handful in the center of Moskva where they take all the tourists who will talk about how superior Russia is to the United States, or things that or analogs in Russia's former colonies. Uh, like they do have pretty nice interior design in some of the stations in Praga, uh, and it's not that it's spending extreme amounts of money without actually providing good service. It's so at the level of maintenance, a lot of renewal money is being spent, and you can see the results. And with things like station construction, they have these oversized stations with lack of standardization, which is not artistic. It is the lack of standardization means it's things like that behind the walls, the wiring does not have standard design, so they have to design it anew each time. Or the escalator vendor is different for different stations of Second Avenue subway. I mean, I'm not gonna make myself the biggest escalator nerd, but I have looked at a lot of the brochures and so on of the various escalator vendors to know things about pedestrian flow capacity to do bush engineering on Penn Station. I don't care whether the escalator was made by Kone or Otis. I don't care. Nobody else does. Um, and the same with the exact placement of the elevators, where if anything, standardization is better for the passengers because you want to have standardized locations for the elevator for accessibility, because the wheelchair passengers would prefer the elevator to be at the same place at every station relative to the train, because then they are just going to use the same one or two cars rather than having to wheel themselves half a train length. If let's say at one place the escalator, not the escalator, the elevator is at the middle end and the other it's at the back end. And same with the oversized stations. It's just break rooms. It's not. It's just back of the house space. Um, yeah, exactly. Um, yeah. So Wamada has these. So Wamada would say that they're standardized, but if anything, the Wamada example makes people think poorly of standardization because separately the Wamada designs are brutalist. So there's lots of space there, but uh, they're also not artistic in any way that is typically perceived as such. Like there are people who like brutalist architecture, but not that many, and I don't think that Wamada is a good example of brutalist architecture. Um, so people think, oh, standardized, everything should be like Wamada, but people deserve beauty. And then you go to New York with the really nicely decorated mosaics, and the nicely decorated mosaics are, I don't think they're a fourth order cost item. They're definitely not a third order. Are there a fourth order or a fifth order item? I don't know. But it's that low. You want art? Go to Stockholm. And yes, it's partly because of something unique to Stockholm geology that you can do bare rock instead of lining. But okay, if you did need lining, they have art at the stations. They have art at the stations in New York. This art is pretty, I think. This art is also ungodly cheap to install because because artists don't actually get paid very much. I mean, we want someone to make you nice sculptures for the platforms. You can do it for, again, we're talking fourth order, fifth order cost items. That's what creates nice public spaces, not separate break rooms for separate for separate departments. Um, and and it's the same with the maintenance, with what led to this, I think, Northeast Corridor meltdown, where yeah, they're spending a lot of money on duct tape and band-aids. They're spending a lot of money on maybe more frequent visual inspections, shutdowns of tracks during weekends. Well, not in the North River tunnels, where they're only doing a weekend shutdown every 3 months, even though the timetables are designed to take a weekend shutdown every weekend. But on the surface, it's not the tunnel that failed. It's surface infrastructure, and in the surface infrastructure, yeah, they do frequent, in Connecticut especially, weekend or even midday weekday shutdowns of one track at a time. They have four, so it's easier. For visual inspections, and somehow it's never just doing something that creates a reliable experience for the passengers, even though the United States is not unique in its history of under maintenance, of deferred maintenance of train service. The United Kingdom had the same issues after World War II. France, West Germany, of course, the entire ex-communist world was maintaining things to much lower standards. There was quite a lot of deferred maintenance in Berlin that needed to be addressed during unification, because maybe the S-Bahn was underinvested in because it was run by the East, and even the Western S-Bahn network was run by the East for the West, and was also subject to boycotts because it was run by the East. And then West Berlin, even internal West Berlin things were under-maintained. Berlin just did not have money. So there are places to learn from in this case. I think Berlin is actually a very good one for urban transit recovery from under-maintenance. Germany in general. Honestly, also UK and France to an extent. And that is what creates a good experience for passengers, knowing that I can buy a round-trip train ticket to Philadelphia and have a reliable experience. Yeah, I'm paying a little bit more than if I'm riding a bus, but it's faster and I can get there. And if I'm riding a bus, then first of all, it's less comfortable and it also takes longer, but also I can get stuck in traffic. That's why I stopped with my experiment with riding buses between New York and Boston. The bus would get stuck in traffic. Amtrak was genuinely more reliable. Is it going to be more reliable in the future, New York Philly? We'll see, but no, that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to make a face. Anyway, are there questions about this extended hour and 18-minute rant? And after we're done Prague, I'm going to ask where you are, because I would like to sit with you, Norbert, and do the ETA report. Oh, good. I guess in general, I just don't have the 30-second lags that I used to have in my previous apartment, with the not good Wi-Fi. And I guess this is like American office Wi-Fi, and my new apartment has good German residential Wi-Fi at this point. Anyway, if people don't have further questions, that's because there have been questions for the last half hour, 45 minutes. Then we can break. Thank you all for watching. I want to say this is a last minute thing, but I did warn people hours in advance on social media, and this is pretty topical. And I mean, it even made the New York Times that there were these meltdowns. It's not a like an obscure event that just happened to me. Thanks, Sonny. Thanks, Mara. Not Mara, Marta. I'm calling you Mara. Anyway, thanks, Sonny. Thanks, Marta. Um, and I will see you either in. Oh, and thanks. Oh yeah. And I will see you. Not sure if Thursday or Saturday. On topic 2BD. So thank you and ciao ciao.